but glad you're here with us. I'm John Larmer, the Editor-in-Chief here at the Buck Institute for Education, and our focus this month is project-based teaching. So we have two very special guests to talk about their work in project-based learning and how they work with teachers. First, I want to remind everybody that this is going to be archived on the BIE.org website, so you can see it later or tell your friends. And if you want to ask questions, you can post them, and we'll try to answer some if we can during the broadcast or afterward on the Google Plus events page. We'll go for about half an hour, so we'll end at about 12:45 today. And next week we'll be having a little hiatus, and then in 2 weeks we'll have another hangout. I'll tell you more about that at the end of today. But first, let's introduce our guests. So Myla Lee and Stephen Ritz from Michigan and New York City, respectively. Myla, tell us about yourself.
Okay, my name is Myla. I'm a national faculty member for BIE. I've been teaching over 23 years, and I've done project-based learning as a classroom teacher. But now I have a special role in my district at Novi Community Schools, which is to be a project-based learning specialist. My whole job is basically to work with teachers and to help them through this process and journey of project-based learning and make sure that they produce quality projects and grow as teachers of project-based learning.
All right, thanks, Myla. And Stephen, tell us about yourself.
Well, good afternoon and hello, everybody. I am Steve Ritz. I am an educator. I am an administrator. I like to say I am CEO, Chief Eternal Optimist of Bronx County, and I am founder of the Green Bronx Machine. And here, right now, 4 stories up in the heart of the New York City Housing Authority projects in a 100-year-old building, we are growing food, we are growing strawberries, we are growing citizens, we are taking project-based learning and putting it in ground zero with kids and classrooms and communities that need it most. I've been a teacher for about 30 years, and I didn't know until I attended PBL World that I was actually doing project-based learning. So I'm a member of the choir, so to speak, and delighted to be singing its praises.
All right. Thank you, Stephen. Great to have you. Yeah, PBL World was a conference in June we had in Napa where Stephen's been our speaker 2 years in a row, and he'll be speaking again next year at the same event. And he's on TED Talks, too, if you want to check him out there. So great to have you, Stephen. All right. So, Myla, Stephen, we have about 4 questions I wanted to toss out to you today. And the first one is sort of about the qualities it takes to be a PBL teacher, and then people you work with, what makes a good PBL teacher. So, Myla, how about you first on that one?
Well, I really have the privilege of working with 2 cohorts of teachers, and I'm starting to see just certain characteristics of teachers that organically just transition into project-based learning well. The ones that are the ones who have a nice growth mindset. That we hear that word a lot, but not only growth mindset in terms of project-based learning, but also growth mindset in terms of collaboration and working with others, not only their colleagues, but their students. I find that what makes a PBL teacher really strong is their sense of reflection. You know, throughout the entire process, Stephen and I were talking about this beforehand, just talking about that recursive process with teachers that, yes, they go along through a project, but then be able to reflect midpoint as well as towards the end and look back and say, hey, what went well, what didn't, how did I grow, how did my students grow, and continually assessing throughout the project. And more importantly, to have that ability to create relationships with students and be flexible, because you know what, it's not always going to go right. You know, they're going to have to, you know, think out of the box, be innovators in their own right, and to model that entire process. I see a lot of teachers that in my district, when they do that, they tend to almost live the walk and talk the talk, and what, you know, to live that whole, their life becomes PBL. They start thinking with a goal in mind. They start to think, what do I need to know to make this project work? What do I need to know to make sure students grow? You know, so I'm finding that teachers are saying, you know what, you're PBLing us, Myla, and my life is becoming one big PBL.
All right. That's an interesting thought, Myla. I like that. So PBL creeps into everyday life. Stephen, how about you?
It's almost like being punked. You're being PBL. But you are a project-based teacher. If you are the conductor of an orchestra you can't play an instrument of, you are conducting project-based learning. So I think Myla hit it on the head. For me, it's about engagement. It's about finding the opportunity, and then it's about making it entrepreneurial. So it is very much a way of life. I am one of those teachers that is far from perfection, but very much a work in progress. And it means not always getting it right, but absolutely 100% committed to getting it right. So a bulk of my practice is both reflective, did I do it right? How could I have done it better? And recursive, what does it take to get me there sooner? And how can I get to the zone of proximal development? It's really looking at incorporating as much formative assessment in real time as possible. And again, you know, Myla went first and gave you the greatest answer. It's about a growth mindset. It's really about not stagnating, but growing. But as my friends in Mexico would say, it's probably about building pyramids on top of pyramids, which is remarkable because that's what the Mexicans have done. They continue to build pyramids on top of pyramids. So it's very much an endless, timeless process that never gets it right, but is absolutely dedicated to constantly getting it right. But where does it lead to with kids? Oh, that's easy. It leads to engagement, opportunity, and an entrepreneurial attitude where kids have 100% ownership. And you're just kind of steering the ship, which is kind of cool.
Okay. So a navigator and a growth mindset, some good words and phrases there about what it takes to be a project-based teacher. I like that. So let's go to our next question. I wanted to ask...
You also got to come to work early and stay up late. That's part of private pay. Be prepared.
Yeah, I hear that, Stephen. Yeah. All right, let's get down to some more nitty-gritty details then about project-based teaching. So my first question about that was sort of in the planning stage. So what does it look like to plan projects and design them and think about them ahead of time before you launch them with kids? So Myla, how do you help teachers with the planning and design phase of project-based learning?
Well, I know with the teachers that I work with, they look at, we have to look at the content standards because ultimately this is what the kids have to learn. But we also know that that's not the most important thing. Those 21st century competencies, those skills, those soft skills, they're just as important, probably even more so. So what we tend to do with the teachers I work with is trying to look at the content and bringing it down to the power standards and trying to integrate some of the key things. And you know, I've worked with a couple with a grade level just like 2 days ago, third grade teachers, fantastic in our district, where we just laid out their content standards and we looked at them, and from there we started looking at some ideas that would formulate. And not only ideas for projects, but where could we see those pieces in the real world, the authenticity piece? You know, how can we see some of those standards make its way through what the kids experience in their daily lives? You know, several of my teachers right now are going towards more of a service learning where their project-based learning units are not only going to be affected by the world, but they are going to affect the world. So those standards become important. So what we do is start with the standards and go from there.
Okay. Thanks, Myla. Stephen, I suspect you might have a little different approach. Or when you talk to teachers about planning projects, how's it work?
Well, listen, I mean, Myla is just giving answers like, whoa, she is tough to speak after. But teaching kids to count is cool, and it's absolutely essential. But teaching kids what counts is so much more of the work that we need to do. And ideally, we can do both at the same time through project-based learning. Listen, standards are non-negotiable. They are what define our work. So there needs to be a marriage to them with a marriage to the passion that we bring to the trade, and therein lies the beauty. If you can find ways to connect standards and Common Core to projects that are going to change children's lives and make them aspire to things and places and visions that they themselves have never imagined, you are well on your way. And that's really what it's about. It's kind of realizing that, listen, there is a Herculean task in front of us, but their answers are right in front of us. And if the kids can come together to cooperate and collaborate, These are really the skills that will enable them to integrate these critical learning skills and critical learning objectives that we are, charged with imbuing upon them. So it's kind of easy. To me, it makes project-based learning makes it a lot easier to get the work done. I've always said that autonomy is not the freedom to do what you want, but autonomy is the freedom to get the job done right. And project-based learning allows a point of entry for each and every student and each and every faculty to accomplish that by finding a role for everyone within the context of what we're paid to do. And in the context of what we're paid to do, we've got to be mindful of what the principal is looking for or your administrators are looking for when they walk into a classroom.
And can I add one other thing? And Stephen brought up a really good point, because he said students, in terms of collaboration and innovation, we want those characteristics from our students. We want those same characteristics from our teachers. So instead of being autonomous, like Stephen said, we want our teachers to collaborate. You can have standards there, and you could be looking at it forever, but when you're collaborating with a colleague, innovation starts to happen because you're communicating, you're using, you yourself as a teacher, you're using those 21st century skills. So what we expect from our children, our students, we need to expect from our teachers.
Okay, good point, Myla. Stephen, I want to ask you one more thing about plans. Yeah.
I'll vote for her. She's got my vote.
Well spoken. Steve, do you actually, how much do you plan ahead for projects, or do you ask teachers to, or do you sort of, I don't know, just sort of launch the idea and get going and then figure out how it's going to, say, address standards or what kids can learn by doing this or that?
I do all of the above. The thing that I do least, quite frankly, is launch and then figure it out. Yeah. I spend far more time thinking and planning because I deal with some critical populations with some critical skills, so every moment matters. And my big thing is I don't want any lost moments in the classroom or during school time. So I spend a lot of time thinking about best case scenarios, worst case scenarios, and everything in between, and then having a B plan and a C plan, because every moment matters. Things go wrong, and if you're not on top of it, it will get on top of you. So I kind of I'm always excited to see what's going to happen, but I kind of want to make sure I know what roads we are going to possibly wander down. The journey's always great. The visuals along the way should be spectacular, but if I wind up in some foreign country or on the wrong airplane, odds are I left from the wrong airport and didn't do my homework. And I don't like being accused of not doing my homework or winding up in wrong countries.
Okay. All right, Stephen, thanks. Let's get to our next question about sort of the details of what it's like when you're in the midst of a project. So what do you think teachers need to do, or how they need to function to help students do well when they're in the thick of a project after it's launched? Myla, some thoughts on that one?
Well, when I'm walking into the classrooms and watching our teachers and Novi doing their projects, I see a lot of them, they're not the sage on the stage. They're right in there with the groups. They're talking with the groups. They're doing a lot of conferring. They're using, they're asking a lot of questions. They're spurring on that inquiry process, not telling the answers. As students go up there, they're facilitating. They are part of the entire process. They're partners in the learning. There's a partnership that's going on with the student and the teacher. In terms of the management of a project and how they do with it, there's a lot. I see teachers having small group meetings, and then after that, dispersing them and really working in and going around the classroom. I don't see them stagnant. They're just as engaged as a student.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Stephen, how does it look like for teachers in the midst of your kind of projects?
Well, for me, my goal and my role, and I see my teacher's role. So when I teach, I want my kids to make their thinking visible. My goal is to make sure that kids' thinking is visible. I'm not there to give them directions, do this, or answer that question and be kind of the guy who can fill in the blank. My role is really to make their thinking visible so I understand their thought process and how to move them to the zone of proximal development. Now, when I'm working with teachers, my goal is to understand what their goals are, not to teach them how to do a project, because odds are they have skills that I can't even begin to imagine. But really, what is the rationale behind their action that is driving their behaviors in class? And then, how will you be assessing for that? How will you be collecting data and formative assessment to move kids forward? That's really what it's about. It's part of my own reflective process, my own recursive process. And that's what I expect people to do, to be on this endless spiral of self-improvement, you know, with concentric circles of success. How do we get it better? How do we do it better? Why? How? What if? You know, for so many of our kids, the answers are right there. Do they really need me to tell them a fact? No, they can type it quicker than they can ask me and hope that I'll pay attention to them. The reality is, you know, they have access to information and facts. What they don't have access to is process. So you want to teach them process. You want to teach them other things and then understand how they're getting to that process and layer it and support it. Scaffold it, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I got a question from one of our viewers here. Maybe I'll relay this one at this point in the discussion. One person asked, in our testing-driven field, how can we inspire curiosity and confidence in our compliance-driven peers? So you guys talked about, building students' curiosity and confidence. This one is sort of asking about their colleagues, teachers. So in your work with teachers, how do you sort of, work around this sort of the fear of test scores? Myla?
Well, that's interesting, because right now I just had a conversation this morning with one of our 5th grade teachers, and they, at first, when they first started the project, this is a pilot for that particular grade level, and they knew that they had certain common assessments and they had standardized tests that were approaching. So they did the first project. They launched it, and the driving question was, should something with Columbus Day, should Columbus Day be recognized? And that was one of their their social studies unit. What was really interesting about it was that when I came back and I said, how did they do on the test? And low down they said, you know what? They aced it. In fact, they not only aced it, they had deeper knowledge than you could have ever expected. In fact, the test did not capture their learning. So part of that is understanding that that the kids are going to go beyond it. Yes, there are some standards and that would have to be addressed, and maybe that's not going to be in the context of project-based learning. Maybe that's a mini lesson that they have to teach. But the depth of knowledge of what these kids will have, they will be able to face the test, the standardized test. I believe that, because I've seen it happen and happen again with the teachers that I'm working with.
Okay, I like that. I like how they went deeper than the test itself. Stephen, how about your thoughts? How do you help teachers have confidence in PBL and our testing culture?
Well, Myla, I got to stop answering questions after Myla, because I'm just going to be kind of speechless and stuttering here. But the reality is, tests aren't going anywhere. So we need to wake up and kind of accept it, and I tell people to embrace them. Because if you embrace them, you're really embracing the opportunity to succeed. For years I said I could cure cancer and cure AIDS, and people would say, that's nice, what about test scores and attendance? But when you do your projects aligned to outcomes and learning that mimic what kids are being tested on, wow, that's where the magic happens. And, I could really break it down. I'm sitting here in my little farm. Asexual reproduction is one of the biggest topics on the science Regents exam here in New York, a non-negotiable test. Now, asexual reproduction is one of the most boring topics in the world, particularly for high school kids. But when you talk about plants having sex, kids get quiet. So when I tell kids to be quiet, my plants are having sex, and use that as an entry point for project-based learning, aligned to the fact that a bulk of the New York State Regents exam has to do with asexual reproduction, I'm doing a whole lot of cross-pollination, as we say. So I kind of welcome the tests within the context of the work that I want to do, and make sure that the projects that I'm designing are reflective of the content that are covered on the tests. Because for my kids, who are often the canaries in the coal mine, when they get a good experience on a standardized test, that's the greatest si se puede moment in the world. The kids actually did it and did it right. beautiful. That's a launching pad to an infinite level of more success, and that's what gets me excited. That's what gets my faculty excited, and most importantly, that's what gets my students excited. They can do it. I really believe we can do it. Is there way too much emphasis on the test? Probably, but you know what? I accept that and move forward and say, I can accept that challenge and one-up it with something that's interesting, invigorating, exciting, engaging, and entrepreneurial. And then the kids take ownership of it. You know, every kid can succeed, and testing shouldn't be the end-all and be-all, but when we accept it as kind of a way to get a lens and get some data and you know, comply with the greater powers that be, which for better or for worse, and I always don't want to, but more often than not, I have to. I too am moving myself, my pedagogy, my students, and my colleagues forward, and that's what it's about.
And I find, you know what, here's one other thing. I find that they don't forget. Like when we teach towards the test, they will remember it for the test and then it's done. But these kids in PBL experiences, not only will they pass the test, but they will remember it from years to come. I have students that are now going into college who have come back and said, hey, Mrs. Lee, do you remember this? And they'll share their learning experiences. They'll share some of the content. And it was the PBL units. Because I gave them a meaningful, purposeful experience that was tied into content.
All right. Thanks, Myla. Okay, I got a couple questions from viewers, but I'll hold them for a second. One involved finding time for teacher collaboration, but that sort of leads into the topic of challenges teachers face in project-based learning. So we've hinted at some of those challenges, and testing is one of those. But and Stephen, I'll start with you this time, so you don't have to follow Myla.
Ooh, thank God.
So, for teachers you work with, what do you think some of the challenges of project-based learning are? Stephen? Well,
I think you got to put some parameters on it. You know, our definition of a project and other people's definition of a project are two different things. So you've got to teach people really to plan. And plan means knowing your outcomes, knowing what you want to get, knowing your inputs, and knowing your assessment points. Mm-hmm. You know, a project is not like taking kids down to the kitchen and saying, okay, there's the supply closet, go bake a cake. No, it's the preparation. It's how you prepare them. It's how you enable them. And it's what you give them and don't give them that ultimately will lead to their success, and how you guide them along the process. It's not like disappearing and saying coming back 30 minutes later. It's really learning to actively be engaged and actively step out of the situation and facilitate. Because more often than not, we want to say as teachers, it's my way. And I work with a lot of veteran teachers who have systems down, and they want to be beholden to those systems. Those systems have worked, and I understand that. But we want to create new systems and new pyramids on top of old ones, I like to say. So it's really kind of enabling people to let go a little, but realizing that letting go does not mean you don't have control of your class, or you're not going to get a good observation report, or you're not, you're going to be held accountable in a negative way for letting go. Letting go sometimes means taking control in a whole different way, and it's important for people to realize that that's what we want.
I like that point, Stephen. Yeah, that it's not letting go entirely, but it's a different kind of control, because that is one of the big things that I think veteran teachers and even newer teachers have a hard time with in project-based learning. Is they are afraid if they aren't directing every moment of the classroom, then things might get out of control. But it's a different kind.
Oh my God! What if you want to? I mean, I get that all the time. Teachers are like to have control, but sometimes the best control is letting it unfold and then reining it in. You can't keep beating the horse to go faster, faster, faster. After a while, they don't feel the whip. Sometimes you've got to let go on the reins and give them a little slack and then pull back and really guide that child where they need to be to get to peak performance. Because at the end of the day, for me, it's about peak performance.
All right, thanks, Stephen. Myla, your thoughts on challenges teachers face?
Now I have to follow Stephen. Okay. A big part of a couple key points that Stephen pointed out that I totally agree with is just planning. The planning is essential. And some people will say, well, how can we have the time to plan? Well, there's always never enough time, but when you put a priority on certain things, then you can make some of the time. I've had teachers who've been very creative with how they've used their time and how to plan things out. Getting a longitudinal view to sort of look out and say, okay, how's my year? When I have my teachers start project-based learning units, they don't go wall to wall. They go slow to go fast. So this first year, a couple of our teachers are really just doing 1 or 2 units. I want quality versus quantity. And so what they're doing, and I tell them, you know, it's going to take at least 3 years for you to feel really good about this, because you're still a learner with project-based learning. And it's okay. Remember, we said the key is reflection. And so, and Stephen keeps talking about the recursive process. So that time element plays a big part in it. When people think, one misconception, they think if I do PBL, I have to go wall to wall immediately. No, start small. You know, doesn't mean you can't be ambitious in terms of certain, like, be visionary in where you want to end up going. But you want to make sure that you can handle the process as you go through this. And so I'm the one reining teachers in because they want to do huge projects. And I want to say, no, let's rein it in. I want you to be able to start a project and finish it. So those are a couple of things, you know.
Not only is Myla ageless, she is brilliant. I couldn't agree with her more. Rein it in. You know, I'm up here building a health, wellness, and biodiversity center, and I want to feed the whole Bronx. I mean, anyone who knows me knows I want to change the world. But how do I do it? 1 kid at a time, 1 class at a time, 1 grade level at a time, 1 subject area at a time.
And 1 teacher at a time.
Right, and 1 teacher at a time. Brilliant, Myla, brilliant. They owe you a raise.
I'll call my boss.
I will.
All right, thanks, guys. We had one question from one of our viewers about making time for collaboration among teachers. So at your schools, or by the teachers you work with, Stephen, how do people find the time? Are they working, you know, all weekend long, all summer long, or are they finding time within a daily schedule that's maybe been rearranged for them? How does the issue of time get handled?
Well,
Myla
for me,
or Stephen?
I am willing to flex my schedule to meet the needs of my teachers. I think good leaders lead, and by leading, you take the lead and make yourself available to be put in a place where people can avail themselves of you according to their schedule. There's no excuse for saying that I'm not available, because I, as a leader, as an instructional leader, really make myself available however, whenever, around everybody else's schedule. And I'm very mindful and very deliberate about that. You know, I'm a big believer in the golden rules for me. Come early, stay late, say please, thank you. I always thank people for correcting me. You know, and I make that part of my mindset. But my expectation is that you are going to want to use me, that you should use me. And my responsibility is to make sure I'm available for you. So everything that I do is rooted in get to yes solutions. You know, how can we meet and make this best for you? And when people feel that energy and that support coming from me, aside from the fact that I'm so irresistible, well, there it is. It's, you know, it's the kind of package that people need. You've got to meet people where they're at. Teaching is a very demanding profession, but I am appreciative of every single professional and pedagogue that walks through my door each and every day with their game face on. And, you know, I'm going to be a piece of equipment or a tool that they can use at their discretion that is legal within the game limit that they have access to within the context of their day.
All right. I'm sure no one's ever called you a tool, Stephen, but yes, thank you for putting yourself in that role for your teachers. Myla, how about you, the challenge of finding time for teachers to collaborate?
Well, I found that in some of the buildings that I work in, the leadership has been really creative in how they've done it. Like I had a 3rd grade who needed feedback, and they wanted to go through the Critical Friends protocol for their project. So what they did was they were creative and tried to find another grade level that, you know, so this leader invited, you know, could we have a lunch together, and while a working lunch, so we can work it and give feedback that way, so our teachers could get the feedback that they needed for their project to move forward. We're also a Google district, and so one of the pieces that some of our teachers are using So because if they know they only have face-to-face time for a limited amount of time, was to use a collaborative piece, and so they created more of a blended piece where they're working on the unit right online and adding to it and pulling away from it and using the comment section. So creating that blended piece. So when they do have whatever limited amount of time to be face-to-face, it's used for key questions that they could only answer face-to-face and they could talk about. So those are a couple of the ways that our teachers have been creative with their time.
Okay, thanks, Myla. Okay, we're going to need to wrap up at this point. I'll come back to you both for a final word for project-based teachers. I think Myla, and then we'll end with Stephen. Just a couple reminders to our viewers then. This has been archived. It will be archived at BIE.org, and you can watch it there. And if your questions weren't answered right now, we'll get to them later on the Google Plus events page. And we're next Tuesday, but we'll be here in 2 Tuesdays with some more special guests talking about project-based teaching, Pearl Arredondo, and a gentleman from the Flat Stanley Project, Dale. So you'll hear from those folks on Tuesday, October 28th, same time, noon Pacific, 3 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time. Okay, so let's get back to Myla and then Stephen for a final word about project-based teaching, or well wishes, or goodbyes, whatever you want to say, guys. Myla, how about you?
Okay, just a couple quick things that I always seem to tell my teachers a lot in our district. Go slow to go fast. Quality versus quantity. And also be the innovators you want your students to be. That's really important. But also for your first couple of projects, learn to forgive yourself, because it's not always going to go right, but be able to look back, give yourself a pat on the back, and move forward and reflect and realize that, you know, this is a process. You're learning too. I always say when teachers grow, their students learn. And so when teachers learn, the students will grow as well. So, you know, keeping with that whole growing movement that Stephen has over there, that whole growth piece is really important. So that's the biggest thing. I know teachers can do this. They have it in them to be PBL teachers, because project-based learning is not only a mindset, it's a culture, it's a framework where all good teaching, all phenomenal teaching lies. It's a framework, but it's intentional, purposeful, and authentic. So thank you so much for this time. Stephen, it's been a hoot just chatting with you. John, perfect.
All right. Thanks a lot, Myla. Thank you very much. We'll see you around. Stephen, last word.
Well, I'm just honored and humbled to be a part of anything. But as Myla says, and as we are proving here in the South Bronx, we are growing something greater, literally. And it all starts with planting seeds. So plant some seeds, have fun, dream big, you know, take time to smell the flowers. All these good things that really are the fruits of a crop well planted and well tended to. If it was easy, it would be done already. So we got to knock it right off the page that it's not easy, but really learn from your failures. My greatest successes have really come from my most unbelievable failures, and just a refusal to put my head in the sand and say, they were right. I want to grow. I want to be better, and I know every teacher gets up every day with this dream of inspiring their children to the newest and greatest levels of accomplishment and performance. And we're not going to get there by doing the same old, same old. So challenge yourself to be better. Have fun along the way. Take a risk, you know. The eyes of the future are looking back at us. They are demanding that we get this right, and we have the ability to teach. Now we have an obligation to reteach ourselves, to teach better, smarter, longer and stronger. And a lot of that is really preparing kids for a future we know very little about. But it all starts with the whole notion of cooperation, collaboration, trust, and revisiting the work as we go, you know, because we will be teachers 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, 5.0, and 6.0 in our lifetime. But have fun. Most importantly, really, have fun. Come early, stay late, roll your sleeves up, get sweaty, get dirty, and enjoy it. And, I'm just blessed. I'm really having a lot of fun. It's a blessing to be a part of this and a part of the movement. And Whoever knew, you know, like I say here in the South Bronx, 30,000 pounds of vegetables later. My favorite crop is organically grown citizens, graduates, members of the middle class. Kids who are doing things I never imagined. You know, we've got strawberries on the 4th floor library in the middle of NYCHA. It's just remarkable, and I can't do it all. So we are the ones they're waiting for. Superman's not coming. It's us. So let's get on our white horses and roll with it.
All right. Thank you, Stephen. Great final words. All right. So bon appetit to you and your strawberries. Thanks very much for joining us, Myla and Stephen, and best of luck with you and your teachers. And folks, we'll see you in 2 weeks. Thanks for joining us here at BIE. Bye-bye.
Si se puede. See you soon, and come visit us in the South Bronx.
All right. Bye.